by an agent. Mr. Brown, have you reviewed the pre-sentence report?
I have.
All right, and do you have any corrections?
I do not, and I'll note I've also complied with victims' rights laws in showing the victims their portion of the pre-sentence investigation, and there were no corrections from their end as well.
All right, and then Mr. Hurley?
Thank you, Judge. We have received the PSI, have reviewed it. Mr. Cummins and I have also discussed it, and there are no corrections.
Okay. So, Mr. Brown, did you want to start with any statements by the victims?
Yes, I think that's where we'll start.
All right.
She has her statement on her phone, so she knows that that's the only time.
Okay, that's fine. You can come on up. All right, I'm going to ask you to pull that microphone down, okay? And you can give either your initials or your first name, whatever you feel comfortable with.
My name is Naporsha.
Okay.
I would just like to start by saying, I have no idea who you are. I've been in Madison, born and raised. I've never even heard of you. You were paid to do something and you did it. And I can never forgive you for it. I feel bad for you because you were sent to do something that very stupid at a young age, and you wasted your life for something that didn't need to be done. And because of your actions, you'll never even be able to grow. You haven't even lived life yet, and you ruined it over something that wasn't even worth it. And it's not much that I can say to you. You already done the damage. That's just something that you're going to have to live with for the rest of your life.
Okay. And you're the sister?
Yeah,
Okay, I'm sorry for your loss.
thank you. Oh, yeah, I do have pictures of, I think I left them back there. We pretty much know without Gauntly, things wouldn't have been done, because Gauntly is the one who personally knew my brother since the age of 5. But in these pictures, I have my brother with his family, and with him, he's even in a picture of my brother's graduation. Gauntly is. So on Gauntly end, it feels more of a betrayal because you knew us. We raised you like family.
Okay, you know what, we're going to do his sentencing
Okay.
after this, and I understand in your mind the difference, and I saw in your mother's statement too, she feels that Mr. Galton was more responsible because he didn't know your brother, and so that's certainly something I'm going to consider, and I do want to hear from you again at the time of his sentencing, okay?
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm done.
All right. And then, Mr. Hurley, is anybody going to want to talk on behalf of Mr. Cummins?
No, thank you, Judge.
Okay.
Right up here, sir. Take a seat. Just speak clearly.
Okay, and you can either say your initials or your first name, whatever you're comfortable with.
My name is Dwayne. My name is Dwayne. I don't know the young man. You know, I don't know you. I heard about you with my son. You know, the other day I celebrated my birthday. I turned 56 years old, and last week I celebrated Father's Day. You know, that's my only son. That was my oldest boy, and you know, I heard that you guys was hanging out, y'all was friends and things of that nature. And as I was having service last night, I've been praying every week to the Lord to give me a word to say to you. You know, I know that, you know, we can't bring him back. It's nothing that you can say, I can say to bring him back. But I want to say personally from my heart that I think that what you done, only God can forgive. God give me the strength to forgive you. You know, I mean, I grew up in the streets just as exactly like you, but it took the hand of God to change my life. And I know where you're going because I was in that facility. But what I want you to understand is that you have to accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, because we all have a place to go. We all got a place to go. And I know you're going to prison, but in that prison sentence, that if you accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, accept your responsibilities, that you're able to be able to live a peaceful life where you don't have to be tormented, you know? And that's what I've been praying. I've been praying to God to ask God to help me to give you a message. Because I know it's hard. I know it's hard as a father to see his son, you know, to happen like that. I thought it would never happen like that, you know, because I left that type of lifestyle. And this is the lifestyle that I live. And so my words to you is that, have you accepted Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior?
Okay, you know what, we don't really have conversations go directly to the person.
Well, I'm just saying because, you know, he have kids. My son got 3 boys, and I don't want my grandsons to grow up with hate in their heart. I want my grandsons to be able to have forgiveness like I have forgiveness. I don't know if he got kids. You know, I don't know if he got kids, but if he have kids, I pray that he will have his kids to have some type of forgiveness in their heart to where they don't have the same retaliation. No, because it have to stop, you know, and I pray that he will accept Jesus, you know, because that's the only way. I know his sister says she can't have a heart of forgiveness, but God give us a heart to forgive, you know. He said you're supposed to forgive those that sin against you. And I know I don't want to sound like cliche or anything like that for me saying that, you know, like you should accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. But that's what I have to say because, you know, if it wasn't Christ in my life, I don't know where I'd be at right now. I'd probably be crazy somewhere, you know, up on a rock somewhere. But I was praying, and that's what, you know, I had it in my heart is that, you know, for you to live and for you to have an understanding, that's my prayer for him. That's my thing from. That's what I want to say from my heart.
All right.
That, you know, I know you said I can't, you know, say things of that nature, but I know that if you accept.
So you can say things of that nature, I just don't want you speaking
But
to, asking
I
him
know
questions.
if you accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, within your heart, I know you will have forgiveness. I know you would think, because it's not like he's a stranger, you know him. But if you accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, I think God can work on your heart to where you can be able to pray for your kids if you got kids, and pray for my son's kids, because I don't want them to grow up with hate in their heart. I don't want them to, you know, I know it's easy to say, you know, but for a father that I lost my best friend. I lost something that I never get back again. You know, I lost something that I helped me to be who I am today. And so if he's a father, I hope that he would take this responsibility and allow himself to become better, to allow himself to get understanding, to allow himself to get knowledge, to allow himself to get some type of understanding while he's in prison, so he don't come out and be a repeater. No, learn how to have a heart of forgiveness. Know that what you did wasn't right. And that's how we learn how to live. That's how we learn how to be better. You know, because I know that, you know, if it was another state or anything like that, you know, death, you know, you could lose your life just like my son lost his life. But you get an opportunity to wake up every day. You get an opportunity, even though you're going to be in a cell, you still get an opportunity to talk, to get on the phone. You still get an opportunity to see your people. I can't see my son. And the only time when I may see my son, if the way the word of God said, I will see him in heaven, it's not that I'll see him like I'm a word, but that's the only way that I can see. I can see my son through the mirror. When I look in the mirror, I can see my son when I see my grandkids. You know, that's the only time. That's the only way I can see my son. But as I'm saying, for you, that's have to happen, because I know that if you don't have repentance in your heart, I hate to see that you find up yourself in hell. And that's my word. That's what I've been saying. I've been trying to ask God really, really to give me something to give to you. And the only thing I can give to you is say, that you have to accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and say, I forgive you because of the love of Christ. I have to forgive you. If I call myself a man of God, if I call myself a man that really loves Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior, I have to have a heart of forgiveness. And I forgive you with the heart of Jesus Christ. But you have to accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. Because if you don't, I know the spirit that carries in you. I know the things that is in you. You're going to go down there to prison. You're going to get involved with gang riots. You're going to get involved with violence. And that's why I know that at this point, you have to accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. And I'm praying for you and your family. I'm praying that we can close this chapter of our lifestyle and be able to love and forgive one another. That's my word I wanted to say.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. That was really powerful.
Mr. Cummins, I don't know you.
I'm going to just first ask you to say your name, either your initials or your first name, whatever you're comfortable with.
A&B.
All right.
I don't know you. And I don't know why this happened. But I know you're very young. And my children, Dwayne was my oldest child. And he was born and raised in Madison. My mom brought us up here when I was 13 years old in 1984. So we wouldn't be in the danger. I was born in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. And I don't understand why my heart does go out to you because you're so young and you shouldn't have been in Madison. You shouldn't have been here. Someone paid you to do a job, and I would like to know who was that. Because everyone should be held accountable. Everyone.
I believe that's it.
Okay. All right, Mr. Brown, obviously, this is a life sentence. So the only issue right now is whether or not Mr. Cummins would be eligible for extended supervision, which we sometimes call parole. And if so, when? The earliest that could possibly be is 20 years. The court can either set a date or can say after a certain number of years that can't go below 20, or I could make the decision that Mr. Cummins never gets the possibility of parole. So what is your recommendation and why?
Sure. This is the rare type of case, unfortunately, we see where the state is going to recommend that you make the defendant not eligible for parole or extended supervision at any point, and that he serve the remainder of his life in prison. The why of that is going to take a minute. I think the court, if I were in your shoes, reading the documents you've read and hearing the things you've heard, still might have questions of why this happened, how this happened, and who are these people and how did they come together. And I think I want to provide a little bit of background, mostly because I don't think that information is honestly being portrayed to the court in the pre-sentence investigation from either defendant. What the court should be aware of is that there are essentially rival factions of the same overarching street gang, a Chicago area street gang, that operate here in the city of Madison. One of those factions is the Block Boys. One of those factions goes by the name of Money Gang. Those two factions, it's largely related to families. And when I say gangs, I hope I'm not anyone's offended in that. I think it oftentimes it's just people you hang out with or people you are associating with in the community. But from a police perspective, because of the activities a good number of the folks are engaged in both of these groups, I think they're classified as gangs, and I'll tell you that there are criteria to classify things as gangs, both from the FBI and locally, and these gangs both fit those criteria. Those gangs began feuding back in 2016 with a shooting that occurred at the O'Grady's Pub on Mineral Point Drive. Since 2016, there have been probably between 8 to 10 homicides between Madison and Chicago where people have been shot, a lot of people injured, a lot of people dead, that have gone back and forth. Some of them have been prosecuted here. I don't know if you've had the opportunity to be involved as a judge in any of them. But it's been back and forth and back and forth. And in fact, you'll hear that in the next sentencing that we're going to do today, that people were pretty open about the back and forth. In fact, just before the homicide, Mr. Galtney, the co-defendant that he was in a car with, that this defendant was in a car with, recorded a rap song called Back to Back, where he talked about how someone in their gang, a guy went by the name of Screwhead, he called him Scroochie in the rap song, had been killed, and therefore they were going to take out two on the other side. That back and forth has continued, and it's become more brazen. I think the vast majority of people who live in Madison do not operate with the understanding that there are somewhat lethal street gangs operating amongst us, and mostly because all of these shootings have, for the most part, occurred at night in areas where I think have been neighborhoods of challenge in Madison, where maybe a lot of folks don't hear about. This crime crossed that boundary, and I think that's the reason there's probably TV cameras sitting behind me, and why there's people that are very involved in this and very interested, and that it happened just downtown, a couple block or so away from the Capitol, right outside the courthouse, right outside the jail. But this was planned in every respect. I know the court sees, unfortunately, a lot of murders, and you have seen a lot of murders over your career, and I would say a good deal of them, in my experience, and I'm sure yours, are people who make very passionate decisions at very bad times with very little resources and perhaps not the best decision-making skills. This is not that. This is planned. The next thing I'm going to say is there's no exhibit I could place on this statement, and this is an assumption, and I'm going to ask you to give it that much weight, in that I believe I could say this at trial, and I would say this at trial, but it seems all but certain that Mr. Cummins has nothing to do with Madison. He's not from here. His connections here are extremely minimal. It appears more likely than not that he was a paid hitman from Chicago who was given money, tens of thousands of dollars, or at least offered that amount of money to kill the victim in this case. I think that's a fair assumption based on all the evidence that exists. And I'm also speaking somewhat cryptically because several of the suspects in this homicide are out and about right now, and the investigation is ongoing. The two people that were in the car that engaged in this shooting have been caught. They're going to be sentenced today. One of them, the shooter's in front of you right now, and the driver later today. But there were other vehicles involved in scouting this out, in watching, and those people are not yet being held accountable. And I know those are ongoing investigations. So I'll start with that. When you look at sentencing someone for a homicide, the court is correct. You have to give them life, and you can decide anywhere between 20 years and never for them to be eligible for parole. I think you have to consider that people who are able to be rehabilitated in our state correctional system, people who are able to come out better people, are often people who make that impulsive decision, not people who think about it. Intent doesn't mean you think about it for a long time, but they thought about it for a long time, and that means something, and it should mean something to the court. I read the PSI in this case, and I was somewhat surprised to see that this defendant claimed that he committed this crime by himself, that he did this all on his own. Because of those statements, I think it's important that you see some videos today, you see some photographs. We're going to start with photographs. To prove that that's just an outright lie, and he's an outright liar. He was in the passenger seat of this vehicle. The car was still moving when he jumped out. It came to a stop, and then started moving before he even got back in. He was not by himself. He is not taking accountability. Mom, who just spoke, is right. If he truly wants to take accountability, maybe he'll tell you who was in those other vehicles, but my guess is he's not going to tell you that. What you have is someone who was very comfortable committing the crime of homicide against someone they didn't even know. And I'm not sure what you make of that or what I can make of that, but he didn't even know this person. So I think that's concerning. One of the things I want to show the court, I'm going to start with, is just some photographs. And I'm putting them up on the screen. I'll note that these are placed on a USB drive, and they'll be submitted into the record and marked as Exhibit 1 in these proceedings. These have all been turned over in discovery. Essentially, I'm going to show you a couple photographs of the location that this occurred. And I'll warn the court, or I'll just forewarn the court that you're not going to see anything graphic in these photographs yet. Obviously, that's the state capitol in that video. And here we're trying to show exactly where the shooting occurred, and that's where the star is. If you look at essentially the bottom left corner of this photograph, that is the Dane County Courthouse where we currently sit, and obviously the jail is right next to us. There's a blue Ford Explorer and a red Chevrolet Impala, and those are the two cars that are involved in this incident. Again, showing that this was well thought out, planned and orchestrated execution. The police were able to track those vehicles from a location in Madison toward the downtown area. City cameras at different times picked up those vehicles. You can see the red Impala and the blue Explorer traveling through our city. I'm going to scroll through some of the photographs, obviously moving through some of the populated areas in Madison, moving toward downtown. Obviously now moving down West Washington Avenue toward the downtown area. And here's obviously the issue, or the area that comes to be important. That yellow line indicates essentially the roads around the jail and the courthouse. Those cars drove in kind of a scouting pattern around waiting for this gentleman, the victim, Mr. Collins, to be released from jail. While I can't say this with certainty, I think it's all but certain and likely that our use in the criminal justice system of technology to inform the public of who's in jail and to broadcast initial appearances likely allowed people to see who was in jail and understand when they were going to be released. I'll note the victim was in jail that day on a very low-level misdemeanor crime, and he was going to be released on a signature bond. Anyone with any basic knowledge of the criminal justice system would have known by his charges alone, which are listed on the jail app, that he was going to be released on a signature bond for those charges. Those cars drove around this area scouting and waiting for some period of time prior to the shooting. Eventually, those cars started backing into spots and waiting for the victim to exit the jail. You can see the red car moving into a better position and again moving around. At this point, we're about a half hour prior to the homicide occurring, after the initial appearance has already occurred in the jail. I'm scrolling through these just momentarily. The cars are continuing to move around and around the area of the jail. At this point, we're looking at just a little bit closer to the time of the homicide. The cars start to back into parking spaces that are near the exit of the jail. There you'll see kind of their final location prior to the shooting. The red car parked closest to the jail, and the blue SUV containing Mr. Cummins and Mr. Galtney was parked farther away. This picture is somewhat unique for one reason, in that the gentleman standing there, obviously looking at the vehicles, is one of the case detectives, in this case, Mr. Sean Kelly, who was walking to work and just thought it was weird. There's nothing illegal about backing into one of those spots, but it just looked odd, and he took a look at it. But to give you an idea of the government personnel that were moving around, the amount of police officers in the area, but they didn't care, as you'll hear, that they were essentially going to be caught. Eventually, that car sees this, which is Mr. Collins released from the Dane County Jail at 4:56. Here's an inside screenshot of him getting his paperwork and essentially a note knowing where to go. He exits the jail and walks towards this vehicle. That vehicle right in front of the camera here is Mom's car. Mom is in the driver's seat. The gentleman that is under that arrow to the front of you is just a random guy that has nothing to do with this case. It's been thoroughly investigated, that the victim knew. And so what happened is he stopped and talked to that gentleman for approximately 30 seconds. All of this was in direct view, as you can see here, of the two cars that were scouting him out to kill him. At 4:58, that blue SUV pulls out, driven by Mr. Galtney, who I'll note his DNA is on the steering wheel, and he's pled guilty to driving that car. Cuts across traffic and pulls right next to Mom's vehicle. Again, Mom sitting in the driver's seat. The victim standing there next to an unrelated gentleman. Mr. Cummins jumps out of that car with a Glock that had something called a switch on it. I don't know if the court's aware what that means. It essentially turns what is a normal semi-automatic Glock weapon, which, to give you some perspective, is the handgun carried by the vast majority of law enforcement officers. A switch is an illegal modification to that weapon that turns it into essentially a machine gun, where you pull the trigger once and bullets just keep flying until you're out. That's Mr. Cummins, who jumps out of the vehicle, and at close range, approximately 15 shots are fired, executing the victim. Again, you'll notice the perspective of other people in the shot. There were people all around. This was the end of the day for people that work in the jail and the courthouse. People were leaving. I will note, while I haven't pointed them out throughout these photographs, I've identified members of courthouse staff that have been walking by these scenes. Mr. Cummins then jumps back in the vehicle flees. This was not an incident where he saw someone he had beef with in the past and decided, I'm going to shoot this person, or I'm going to try to protect myself, or I can't overcome my passion. This was something that was thought about beforehand, likely planned the days, if not the day before. People met at a separate location and they drove down here. This was a pre-planned execution of someone who they knew, by nature of the building he was walking out of, couldn't be armed and couldn't defend himself. And I think the court needs to take that into consideration. The actual crime itself, oddly enough, was captured on video. And I think it's important for you to see it. I have clipped out approximately 3 minutes, there's no sound, of the crime occurring. I'll note that this is difficult to watch. I've showed the victims before coming in, but it does show the crime, and I think that's important. This is from a Madison Police Squad car that's camera was just latently recording in the background. And I'm going to play that through, and I'll describe events as they happen and give you some time stamps. Approximately 11 seconds into this, that's the victim, Mr. Collins, exiting the jail and walking toward that gentleman that I previously had pointed out. Again, that's Mom's car directly in front of you. The vehicle is approaching. Mr. Cummins is jumping out. In that short period of time, again, more than a dozen shots were fired. Mom has obviously gotten out of the car now to try to help her son. I'll note the first police cars arriving at this point. He doesn't know anything's happened. He's simply returning to work. There has not been a call out yet that this has happened. And obviously that officer just figured it out and called out the shooting. the gentleman who just ran across the street, who doesn't look to be a police officer, was an off-duty EMT from Wanakee who was trying to help. And I'll stop playing there. I'll give you the timestamp. That's at, I believe, 3:28. The defendant and his co-defendant fled from that scene, obviously. The shots were fired and they drove away at a high rate of speed. Mr. Galtney is going to be sentenced for that later today. He's in the driver's seat. They did a high-speed chase throughout the city of Madison, hitting at least one other vehicle. They were chased essentially over toward the Alliant Energy Center. A good deal of people in Madison were endangered by their high rate of speed. That chase extended down Park Street, Fish Hatchery Road, and some of the other major arteries here in the downtown area. As they got over to the Alliant Energy Center, they ditched the car at the Gerber Collision Center that's on the outside periphery of that building and fled. Dogs and obviously a ton of police quickly surrounded and they started sniffing out where everyone was. Mr. Galtney was found walking down the street and he was apprehended. Mr. Cummins was tracked using a dog and eventually threw his hands up and surrendered after being given commands that the dogs were going to be released and likely bite him. He later did tell the detective he essentially didn't want to get bit by the dog, and that's why he came out. While he may have pled guilty ultimately, he was not repentant that day. He conducted an interview with the detective to my right, Detective Stachel, for some period of time in the period after this homicide. Denied being involved at all. Was smiling at times, was essentially making fun of the fact that, saying that the Madison cops have never left Madison and that he was going to beat the case. And in fact, a quote from that interview was he looked at Detective Stachel and said, "Charged doesn't mean convicted, sweetheart." And obviously he was charged. That night, he began making jail calls that we were able to capture, in which he was less enthusiastic about his prospects and essentially predicted that he was going to prison, which is obviously the case. Ultimately, he does plead guilty, and I'll talk about that. I gave no plea offer, essentially, to the defendant, other than dismissing some of the minor charges involved. This is not a case in which there was ever going to be any doubt, and I'm sure that's why he pled guilty. Not only did this crime occur essentially on video, and he was captured probably 10 minutes after it happened, his DNA ended up being found on the gun that they threw out of the car, and that was also on camera. There was essentially no choice for the defendant, and essentially I'd see his guilty plea as an attempt to take responsibility. And I would encourage him, if he wants that, to fully do so and tell us what happened here. But again, I don't think he's taking responsibility. I think he's trying to make a last-ditch effort at not being held accountable for this crime by being able to use his guilty plea to say that you should cut him some break and not send him to prison for the remainder of his life. It's strategic. And if you need any evidence that it's strategic, you just watch the video and can clearly tell that he lied in the pre-sentence investigation and that he was not the only one involved in this incident. The defendant is a dangerous person, and I hear the family, and I understand they feel betrayed more by Mr. Galtney, and I understand that, and I think that's going to be something that they'll talk about in the next hearing. But when it comes to someone like Mr. Cummins, I have another role. I'm not a victim of this crime. I represent the executive branch of government and the enforcement of our laws, and I see someone who is willing to kill people. Willing to kill people they don't even know, probably for money, and really for little to no reason. I will note that the dangerousness of the defendant has not been reduced by him being in custody. He has been a difficult inmate to deal with. He has made threats. In fact, he's been charged and probable cause had been found at one point for him threatening to kill a deputy in the jail shortly after this incident. Some of the quotes from that incident, he said to the deputy, "I'll shoot you and I'll kill you." He then said, "I'm still young and I'm gonna get out," when talking to a sheriff's deputy. Those threats, as I understand, have continued even to yesterday. You have in front of you an extremely dangerous person who I do not believe can be released. And for when the court, considering the galleon factors, the gravity of the offense, and the need to protect the public, and the rehabilitative needs of the offender, that has to be paramount, that you have in front of you an extremely dangerous person. I think you also should weigh up the deterrent effect of sentencing. Madison is a safe city and has long been a safe city. And I do fear that there is a growing reputation that crimes won't be punished as severely here. And I only say that based on jail calls I listen to, including of the defendant, and trying to calculate the years they're going to get for committing crimes. This is a unique crime in that he didn't seem to care that he got caught. He did it in front of the jail, knowing you're going to be on multiple cameras. I showed you one. There are probably 5. There was no doubt in the world he was going to be caught. He didn't care. It was a calculation based on money or respect or retribution, but this is not someone who thought they were even going to get away with it, probably. If he did, this has to be the most poorly planned crime in the history of crime, and I don't think it's that. I think he kind of didn't care and thought it was a calculation, and that someday he'll get out, maybe have some money, maybe have more respect. I think there is a deterrent value in saying to anyone who wishes to engage in this type of violence here in Dane County, city of Madison, that if you engage in it, you will die in prison. If you go and shoot someone and execute someone next to our jail who is defenseless, we're going to lock you up and you will die in there. Whether you're 18, 19, 20, 25, 50, I get he's young. He knew exactly what he was doing. And that deterrent effect, I think, can be real. I think people are paying attention. I think this is a group of people that will pay attention to what we do. I don't believe the defendant has any rehabilitative needs that can necessarily be mitigated or that can mitigate his dangerousness. And so I ask you not to consider rehabilitation with any great weight. You have to consider it, but you don't have to give it great weight. And I don't think there's any weight here. This is not the type of crime in which someone needs AODA treatment or a couple trips to the therapist to figure out. This was cold and calculated. So for all of those reasons, I'm recommending that you not set an eligibility date, that you make him not eligible for extended supervision release at any point in his life. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mr. Hurley.
Thank you, Judge. The state has brought up many issues that they base their recommendation on for a decision to be made by the court that does not allow Mr. Cummins to see the light of day. I did submit a pre-sentence memorandum, sentencing memorandum that I believe that you've had received and read. Mr. Brown mentioned that he'd also received and read it. So I will not repeat what I said in there, but I did want to bring up a few items or points that Attorney Brown mentioned that I wanted to at least respond to. First and foremost, Mr. Cummins always has the right to trial, and he could have gone to trial. In many prior cases in this jurisdiction, in Dane County, where individuals have been charged with first-degree intentional homicide, and the proof is extremely strong, they still decide to go to trial because they've got nothing to lose. Why not go to trial? Mr. Cummins did not get a plea offer. Mr. Brown charged him with first-degree intentional, and that's what he pled to. Some minor charges were dismissed, but other than that, Mr. Cummins knew that he was pleading to a charge, Class A felony, which was going to be a mandatory life sentence. He did not put the family through the trials of a trial, the emotional component that's contained therein. Mr. Cummins took responsibility and entered a plea, knowing full well that he was going to be sentenced to life in prison. Additionally, Mr. Cummins, in his PSI, does take responsibility. The state claims that he doesn't, but he clearly states in the defendant's version that I was locked up for killing someone because I was shot here in Madison and no one did anything. That brings me to my next point that I'd like to discuss. The state has mentioned numerous times that Mr. Cummins was here as a paid hitman, a Chicago hitman. Mr. Cummins was caught with 4 grams of heroin on him when the police apprehended him near the Alliance Center. Mr. Cummins admitted that he was here, that the heroin belonged to him, and that he was here to sell it. He also stated that he'd been here to Madison many times to sell drugs. He hadn't been caught, but he'd been up here many times. Additionally, as part of his statement to the PSI author, Mr. Cummins says that he shot the victim in this case because Mr. Cummins, had previously been shot by the victim. Mr. Cummins also states that he knows that that is not the correct way to resolve things and it didn't accomplish anything. Now, that's in hindsight. The victim is deceased. So the come to Jesus afterwards, for lack of a better phrase, is a little late. But Mr. Cummins does take responsibility. He does explain, at least offer an explanation as to why he did what he did, why he was in Madison, and that he had been here many times before. As to taking responsibility, Mr. Cummins in the PSI, when asked about why he did what he did, as I've already mentioned, he felt that after he'd been shot in 2021 that law enforcement didn't arrest anybody, so he took it into his own hands, vigilante action. Again, he also in that same sentence or statement makes clear that it was not the correct action to take and that he also feels sorry about what he did. Now, I know the state believes that Mr. Cummins is just making this up and calculating the best way to get what he wants, which is for this court to make a determination that he's eligible for parole or extended supervision. That is what we are asking for as well. The state also brings up the fact that this was a long planned execution and that Mr. Cummins had had put this together for some period of time. When I think about Mr. Cummins at his age of 20 when this incident occurred, this court is well aware that the specifically male maturity level and full formation of the cognitive functions does not occur until around the mid-20s. That is not an excuse for Mr. Cummins' action. However, a spontaneous action is not an action necessarily that takes place in just the second. It can be an action that takes place that makes a determination, then let's just go for it. Let's just do it. And I offer to the court the fact that Mr. Cummins, at not even age 21 at the time of this terrible, tragic shooting that he has taken responsibility for, did not understand and could not cognitively form the full repercussions of what he was doing. And I believe that is borne out by his statements in the PSI, where he does express remorse and understands that the loss to the family, specifically to the victim's mother, and he can't comprehend what that loss entails. So although the state has put forth a theory of a hitman with a long period of planning in advance, I put forward a different theory that Mr. Cummins took justice into his own hands based upon a prior shooting where he was shot, and wasn't cognitively able to understand or form the understanding of what he was really doing. He has taken responsibility. He's expressed his remorse in his PSI. He's going to make a statement to the court today. He was not 20. He was not 21 at the time of the shooting. He's now 22. should this court decide to offer him or to allow him to be released on parole or extended supervision after a period of 20 years, he would be 42 years old. So double the time, double the number of years that he was at the time that this crime was committed. No one has a crystal ball, Your Honor, and Mr. Cummins has committed the most serious of crimes. We all know that, and I express my remorse to the family, and Mr. Cummins will as well. However, does locking Mr. Cummins up for the rest of his life accomplish a retributive goal, a punishment goal, or does this court consider Mr. Cummins' life that he would be living in 20 years to be worth living for him on the outside? It is our argument, my argument, that yet the answer to that is yes. He will have had 20 years in prison. His mind will be fully formed. He will have the ability to understand the gravity of what he's done to a greater extent. And as the victim's father mentioned, he will have the opportunity he will live with this for the rest of his life. I would ask the court to adopt or to rule or find that Mr. Cummins is eligible for parole after a period of 20 years, based upon the fact that he has entered a plea, he has taken responsibility, he did not put the family through a trial, he has expressed remorse, and he's here today understanding that you have the power to sentence him to life or allow him the opportunity to prove that he can be a contributing member of society. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hurley. Mr. Cummins, would you like to say something before I make my decision?
Yes. I will not make any excuses today of why this happened. So I wouldn't be like making excuses saying there's a reason why this happened. I'm sorry that I can't answer all the family questions for them today. I read the PSI statement from the mother and understand that I really hurt a good woman and that I'm sincerely sorry for the trauma that I put them through. As in, everyone probably think that I took accountability to get a way out. I fully understand that me pleading guilty to intentional homicide was going to give me a life sentence. So whether my charges, the 2 lit charges that got dropped or not, I knew that I was pleading guilty to life. I understand that I made a big mistake. I can only accept accountability for myself. I can't accept accountability for everyone else. I can only take accountability for my actions. Whether I get a chance to come home or not, I'm still gonna work on bettering myself as a man, whether I get a chance to come home or not. That's all I gotta say.
All right, thank you, Mr. Cummins. All right, well, this case is obviously the most serious crime that somebody can commit. It requires a life sentence. There's no possibility of probation. So as I indicated earlier, the only question is whether or not Mr. Cummins will ever be given the possibility of extended supervision, which people sometimes call parole. So I have to consider the factors that the Wisconsin Supreme Court says I'm supposed to consider in making this important decision. So the first thing is the nature of the crime. And, Mr. Brown did an excellent job at highlighting how serious this crime was. You and Mr. Galtney knew that the victim was leaving the Dane County Jail. You planned this. It was done in downtown Madison as residents of the county were leaving work. It was done in broad daylight. It was done between the jail and the Madison police station, and it was done in front of the victim's mother. You and your co-defendant then took off and you led a risky chase through our main roads. Thankfully, no one else was injured, but the seriousness of the crime can't be understated. I'm still not clear about the motive here. It seems like it's gang-related. I know that one of the victim's brothers is also facing sentencing in another homicide. So there's clearly stuff going on here in the community that I don't know. I don't know if this is a beef between families, if this is a beef between gangs. I'm not exactly sure what the motive is. But both you and Mr. Galtney admit that it was basically a revenge situation. And I don't know if you were shot or if Mr. Galtney was shot at, or it's just unclear to me exactly what's going on. But given the law enforcement presence, given the PSIs, it does appear that there's clearly gang activity that's related to this. Which brings me to the issue of protection of the public. Gun violence is increasing, at least it has in the 14 years that I've been on the bench. Too many young men are being brought to emergency rooms after shootings involving drugs, gangs, and guns. Sometimes there are innocent victims like children who wind up in the crossfire. And it's very sad for me to see young men like yourself with great potential either being a victim or being incarcerated during the best years of your life when you could be working, enjoying your life, having a family, being there for your children. And instead, we're seeing young men like yourself either dead or incarcerated. And that is a very bad situation that we are facing here in the Madison area. And, you have a child, and your child is never going to know you because you're going to be locked up. And that is a child who isn't going to have a father figure. But we can't have people shooting each other in broad daylight in our downtown. Mr. Brown's right, you are dangerous, and that's why the crime does carry a mandatory life sentence. So on the one side, we have the scale, the seriousness of this crime. We have the need to protect the public. And so you have to get the life sentence. But then I also have to look at the other side of the scale to see if there's anything that convinces me that you should one day be able to go before a judge and make your case for release. It doesn't mean you get it, but whether you get the opportunity to make the case to a judge, and if so, at what date. So when I look at your character, I do, and I think that the victim's family, they recognize that you are a young guy. You were 20 at the time. You weren't even able to buy an alcoholic beverage at the time that you committed this crime. So you were a young guy. Based on the pre-sentence investigation, it looks like you did grow up in difficult circumstances. You were raised by your grandmother. Your father is in prison. There appears to be some mental health issues. I think you have some issues that haven't been addressed. I know your grandmother said when you were young, you were on medication, you were sent to facilities. So there's clearly some mental health issues that haven't been addressed. And also substance abuse issues. It looks like you started using, drugs when you were 14. We know you were selling drugs as a way to make a living. So, there are treatment needs and mitigating factors that I think I have to consider. And then I do take into account that you did take responsibility by pleading guilty. You spared the state and the family the stress and the expense of having a trial. And I do believe you've shown some remorse. I know that law enforcement and the victim's family want to know exactly who was behind this, exactly what was going on, and they haven't received that. And the fact that you would come to our community from another state on multiple occasions to deal drugs and then be involved in this violence is a very concerning thing too. So that's kind of all of the factors I think that I have to consider. And I also have to give a lot of weight to the victims in this case. So first to the mother. I cannot imagine I just can't imagine what it must have been like for you, thinking you were going to pick up your son and to witness that. I mean, that is something that's going to be with you, forever. And to the father, the fact that you yourself have been through the prison system, and your generosity of spirit and your recognition that people can change, they can change, and the fact that you're out here in the community making a really powerful statement. I'm sorry that you lost your son. I mean, that's horrible. And to the sister, I'm sure you loved your brother. He sounds like he was a fun guy. He was a father. He had 3 children. So it is a loss to you all, and I'm so sorry, and especially to Mom who had to see it. But I really was quite moved by Mom's statement when she said that the last time she spoke with her son, that she had a feeling that something was going to happen, that she knew, or that he knew that something was going to happen, and that she sort of had, and it's mothers know, and that she kind of had a premonition that something like this could happen. It appears to me that the family of the victim in this case is being very forgiving in some way. The father said it, and the mother's statement in the pre-sentence where she says, "I'm angry at you, but I don't hate you. This is the society you grew up in," and that she does not believe that you should spend the rest of your life in prison. And so when we look at what our criminal justice system is all about, I mean, there's a part of us that say, you took a life, you give a life. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But that's not what we're just about. The criminal justice system is more about that, about punishment. It's about justice. It's about recognizing that people do have the ability to change. So I do think that an entire life in prison is not warranted in this case. So I am going to find you eligible to ask a court for release to extended supervision on the date you will turn 65 years old. That would be August 28th, 2061. I think by that point, you will have been able to take the time and you can make the case to a judge. I can't guarantee a judge will give it to you, but I think you should have the opportunity because I recognize that there is capacity to change. The law requires, because I've made you eligible, that I have to advise you of certain things. You may petition the court for release to extended supervision no earlier than 90 days prior to the date I set. Your behavior while serving your sentence could affect your eligibility date. Wisconsin law requires the warden of the prison to keep track of any violations of prison regulations, and the Wisconsin Department of Corrections may delay your eligibility date for a certain amount of days per violation. 10 days for your first violation, 20 days for your second, and 40 days for your third and any subsequent offense. So your conduct at prison will also affect that eligibility date. Your eligibility date could also be delayed if your violations of prison regulations result in your placement in adjustment, program, or controlled segregation status. Your eligibility date would be delayed by 50% of the total number of days you spend on segregation status. Again, your conduct in prison will affect your ability to petition. When you file your petition for release to extended supervision, you shall serve a copy of that petition to the district attorney's office who is responsible for prosecuting your case, and that district attorney will have 45 days to respond. The court will then review your petition and any response submitted by the district attorney's office and determine whether or not a hearing needs to be held. The court may grant or deny the petition without hearing. Before making a decision on the petition, the court shall allow the victims to make or submit statements concerning your release. A court may not grant your petition for release to extended supervision unless you have shown by clear and convincing evidence that you are not a danger to the public. If the court does grant your petition, The court may impose conditions of your extended supervision. If the court does not grant your petition, the court will specify the date which you may file a subsequent petition. You may appeal an order denying your petition for release, and the appellate court may reverse an order denying your petition only if it determines this court erroneously exercised its discretion in denying your petition. This information I have read to you is a summary of the statutes governing petitions for release to extended supervision. For the full statute regarding petitions for release to extended supervision, you should go to 302.114, and you should consult your attorney if you have questions regarding this. Obviously, you do have felony consequences. You can't vote, and you may never own or possess a firearm. So, Mr. Cummins, you're being given an opportunity. You'll be an old man, but you'll still have some life, which your victim did not have the opportunity to have. So I hope that you take advantage of the opportunity. And if there is nothing else, you have 20 days to appeal what we've done here today. I'm not sure whether credit needs to even be applied. Oh, and I'm sorry, I misspoke about your birth date. Your birth date is May 1st, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and so you will be eligible on May 1st of 2066, which will be 65.
And Judge, I would ask you hold the restitution order open for 30 days. We're going to submit that
And then there
shortly.
will be a restitution order. So at this time, if there is nothing further, we will take a break and we will commence the next sentencing at 10 o'clock.
Thank you.
All rise for the court.
Can be seated. Okay. Okay. And did you, Ken, were you able to find out what the victim's position is on all of that? Did you talk to the state? Yeah. That's okay. That's fine. That's what I figured. Okay, that's good.
So can I just, I'm not gonna show the things.
Okay.
So.
Okay.
So as soon as all three kids here, and she didn't want to come until the other two were here. Right. We had it all worked out, we'll just see how it falls.
All right.
All right, you can be seated. All right, we're going to go on the record in State of Wisconsin versus Amand Galtney, 22 CF 862. I'll have the parties say their appearances for the record.
William Brown for the state of Wisconsin.
Good morning, Your Honor. Amon Galtney in person along with counsel Reed Cornea.
All right, and we are here for sentencing. The media is here. I've advised them that they are permitted to live stream the proceedings. They are not to show anybody in the gallery. They are not to show the family of the victims if they choose to make a statement. But they are permitted to live stream the attorneys, the court, as well as Mr. Galtney if he chooses to make a statement. For the people in the courtroom, once you're in, you're in. If you choose to leave, you may not come back in. At this time, the courtroom is closed. Nobody else will be permitted to come in unless it's a member of the victim's family who, for whatever reason, had to go. But otherwise, nobody else is permitted. If you have a cell phone, it needs to be turned off. It cannot be on mute. It cannot be on vibrate. It needs to be turned off. If we find out that there's a cell phone in the courtroom, you will be asked to leave the courtroom and you will not be able to return. And then obviously, I know this is a very emotional situation, and but this is a court of law. I expect that people will behave as if it is a court of law. I don't want any statements or outbursts that are not consistent with the rule of law. So with that, those instructions, we will go ahead to the sentencing. So Mr. Brown, I have Mr. Galtney's pre-sentence investigation. I've reviewed it. Are there any corrections by the state?
No.
Then Mr. Cornea, have you reviewed the pre-sentence investigation with Mr. Galtney?
I have, Your Honor, and there's no corrections to be made.
All right, and I do believe, is the agent in the seated in, or somebody from DOC is in the jury box, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, and I didn't acknowledge you at your, at the other hearing. I mean, obviously, these cases were back-to-back. They arise out of the same crime, so certain things were said, but I'm sorry if we have to do it again, but I think in order to make a complete record, we do. So, Mr. Brown, does anybody want to speak on behalf of the victims?
Yes.
Okay, and then before you do that, I just want to check in with Mr. Cornea. Is anybody going to want to speak on behalf of Mr. Galtney?
Your Honor, no.
Okay, so why don't we go ahead and hear from the victim's family?
Let me see.
Oh, sorry.
The two that went in can come in, and then that's it. All right, I'm just going to, I've been advised by the bailiff that we did have two individuals who are family or friends of Mr. Galtney come in, and that's fine, but that's it. We're done. If somebody came, they're late, then they can't be here. It was scheduled for 10:30. It's 10:35. I don't want to be continuously interrupted, okay? So go ahead, and then we have, and you want to just say your first name or your initials, either one is fine.
Portia.
Okay, and then Portia, and you're the sister, correct? Okay, so what would you like to say?
I miss my brother. Not a day goes by where I don't think about him. He was an amazing father and becoming a better one. I'm most saddened by him not being able to reach his full potential in fathering his kids. I think about his jail release all the time and how all I thought about when he got home is he better not ask to play my PS4 because that's what he enjoyed doing the most. That was his therapy. He was a homebody, a gamer. He tried his hardest to stay out of trouble. He was doing so well. But I'd give anything for him to walk through the door and see him right there playing the game again. I'm not mad at Commons. I don't know him. He was paid to do a job. He did it. I'm more upset and I feel more betrayed by Gantley. We knew you. You were like family. You've been to our home. You've eaten at our table. You've slept at our house. Been to family functions. My family gave you a safe place when you didn't have one. And you turned around and helped execute one of us. The most sickening feeling. And I really feel like you could have prevented it. You could have spared my brother, but you chose not to. I wish it could have been anyone else in that car but you, not someone that I know, not someone that my family saw as family. For you, I have no forgiveness, and I hope you get the maximum sentence and you're never able to see the light of day. I do have this picture here that I want to present to you.
Before the judge gets it, you want to make sure to tell her who she's going to see in what order, from left to right?
It's my brother, his friend, another one of my brother's friends, my little brother, his friend, and then Amand and another friend.
So your brother's farthest to the left and Amand is second from the right.
Yes.
Okay.
We have pictures since we were 5 and 6 together. We don't have them at the time, but it just shows that you were like family. You were at my brother's graduation. You've been to family functions. You knew us very well. So for you to participate in the execution of my brother, it just says how heartless and cold the act really was. How can you participate in the death of somebody that viewed you as family?
Okay.
I'm most saddened and most hurt by your involvement, and that's it.
All right, thanks, Naporshan. Again, I'm so sorry for your loss. Did you show the picture, Mr.
did.
Brown, to Mr. Cornea, Mr. Galtney? Okay.
Yeah, we received it.
Okay, and then we have, and your first name's Dwayne, right?
Yes, my
And your
name's Dwayne.
dad, okay?
Yes. I wanted to say, you know, it's a stranger that comes into your house you don't know, but a family member you know is heart. And I have forgiveness in my heart for you today, and I hope that you can have the same forgiveness through accepting Jesus Christ, because you can stop it. You can stop it today. Today, if you just accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, you can see the wrong in it and you can see the right in it. You know, you have an opportunity to get things together, how to get it together by accepting Christ as your Lord and Savior, and then you can stop all this craziness. You know, it can stop. It can stop by you when you say, well, Lord, I know that I did wrong and I accept my wrong, but I don't want anything else, repercussion, to come out of this. So I forgive you with my heart, you know, because Christ gives me the right to forgive you. You know, and I was back there thinking, you know, most likely when people see my son, they attach me, they say, well, that's Dwayne's dad, or they call me Unc. You know, and I'm speaking to you as my nephew. You know, you have to get things together, and how to get things together, you can't do it on your own. I know that you're going to be going to prison, you know, and in the time that you're going to prison, I want you to reflect back on, because it's not just you're not a stranger. You at there, you even wore the same shoes You probably even wore the same pants. Y'all sit there and talk about your all problems. Y'all sit there and talk about probably the same girl, whatever. But I just want you to understand that in my heart, I'm Dwayne's dad. That was my oldest son. And we may cross each other before. You even maybe call me aunt. But I'm just saying that in my heart that what happened for me, I had to accept Jesus Christ. And by you accepting that, you can see the wrong in it and you can see the forgiveness, because I understand, and my understanding is that you pleaded guilty. That's why you don't go on a trial. And so that means you took fault. You acknowledged what you did wasn't right. And so to make things better, that if you could just, see yourself, in the hand of Christ, because there is a time, judgment is coming. And I don't want you to go to a place that what it says that when judgment comes, because that is a heaven and hell. And I'd rather for you to be in heaven. I don't want you to go to hell. And so I'm from my heart, I just want you to know in your time that you spent in the sales and things of that nature, I want you to reflect back on, but let God help you. Let God change. Let God do things different in your life. Because if you got kids, I don't want your kids to grow up in the society of doing stupid stuff like we do. We do stupid stuff. And so I'm praying that you would give God grace to grow with you. That's my prayer. And I forgive you with my heart. I forgive you with the heart of Christ, because you're not just no stranger. You just like, you just like my own son, and I hope that in this time that you spend, that you will have forgiveness in you. You got to have forgiveness. And if you can have forgiveness in you, then you can change. You can change all this craziness. And so that's what I have to say. I've been praying to God, to wherever I can, to do this, because it's hard to lose a son. It's hard to lose someone that you love, and I've never been in this position before. But what I want you to know is that I have a grace. I have forgiveness for you. I know that God can change you. I know that God can do great work with you, because you're still a young man. I don't want you to go to prison and just do dead time. I want you to go to prison to learn, to develop, to get an understanding, and know what you did wasn't right. Know what you did, that you don't want nothing else like this to go down like this again. So the buck stopped with you. So by accepting Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, you will see fault. And then anything else that come up out of that, you would say in your own heart, no, we can't do this. They can't go this way. They can't go that way. And so that's my word for you today, because I got 3 boys that I got to speak into their lives. He got his oldest 13-year-old, he got a young one, and I got to kind of like develop them so they won't come up with the same mentality, where they won't have revenge in their heart, but they have forgiveness in their heart. And I hope you have the same.
Thank you, Dwayne. There are a couple of people who appear to be wanting to come in. How many are out there to the law enforcement? 2, okay. I'm going to let these last 2 people in, and then after that's it. They can come in now. Oh, there are 5 now? Okay, well, okay, you can go ahead and sit down. Okay, and I love children, but if I hear any noise from the child, I'm gonna have to ask you to leave the courtroom, okay? All right, and so now we have the mom of the victim here, and you'll just say your initials one more time, please.
AMB.
Okay, go ahead.
Excuse me. I don't know what happened between you and Dwayne or you and Christopher, but that was wrong. I hated to see you in that car, or to know you was anybody that Dwayne knew was in that car. It angered me so bad, but I don't hate you. I don't hate you. But what you did was wrong. You hung out at our house with Christopher.
You stayed nights at our house. It wasn't nothing that you kids asked me for that if I had, I wouldn't give it to you. And you know this. But to see you in that car or to know you was in that car, it took something from me. I'm not the same anymore. And I'll never be the same again because I will never see Dwayne until I cross over to him. You know how I feel about my kids. You know how I looks out for them, take care of them. I have no offense towards the judge, but right now today, I wish she was Judge Oddek or Northrop because they would have gave you life. The same thing if they would have gave the shooter. They would have gave you life plus 139 years. What you did was wrong. And I cannot forgive. I don't want to forgive. I don't want to forgive.
Okay, anyone else from the victim's family?
No.
All right, and then Mr. Cornea, there were a few people who came in a little bit late. Had you scheduled any of them to say anything on behalf of Mr. Galtney?
No, I
Okay.
was hoping to talk with him beforehand, but let me just do a real
Okay.
quick check. Thank you. His girlfriend, fiance, would like to make a statement. Miss Magé.
Okay.
I hope I said that last name. It's Magge.
Okay,
That's my French heritage that wants to say.
all right. Can come over. I'm going to have you go because of the setup here. I'm going to have you actually go to the witness stand, okay, to make your statement so that you have a microphone.
And Your Honor, we asked about the child being provided to another individual, an aunt or something, but indicated that he might put up a big fuss if that was the case.
All right, that's fine, and the child is being very well behaved, so we'll just go ahead and have you sit up there and make a brief statement, okay?
Thank you, ma'am.
And then it's over there, there should be a microphone there. Okay, and then your first name again, can you spell it?
Aaliyah, Aliyah.
Okay, and what would you like to say?
I just want to apologize on the behalf of Amon. This is not okay, but he has a son, if you guys can't see. His son is about to be 2 years old in September. Amon is not a horrible person. I know him personally more than anybody knows him. He is the most gentle father, and he helps me with my other son. I have another kid that he took on as his own. He is a gentle father. He's a gentle man. He's always been there. He take care of his family. He always show up and show out for everybody. And this is not okay, and I'm not excusing that, but I would love for his son to be able to see him actively, to be there with him. And I just hope y'all take that in consideration today. Like, he got a 2-year-old son that ain't gonna never see him again.
Okay, thank you, Willie, I appreciate it. Okay, as we discussed at the last hearing, this is a life sentence, so the only question is whether Mr. Galtney will be ever eligible for parole, which we call extended supervision. The earliest that could ever happen is at 20 years, or it could be at any time the court sets after 20 years, or it could decide to never let him have the privilege of extended supervision. So, Mr. Brown, on behalf of the state, what do you think I should do and why?
The defense and I are in agreement that this is the type of situation in which the defendant should be eligible for extended supervision at that earliest date, which is 20 years. I'm going to talk a little bit about, just to make a record, obviously sentencing transcripts follow people, and this transcript will be used in 20 years if the defendant applies for extended supervision. To talk a little bit about the crime, I commend the defendant for honestly participating in the pre-sentence investigation. I'm going to read a quote. The defendant reported that this was a targeted shooting. He knew of his role and knew the co-defendant had a firearm with the intent of shooting the victim. That's the first line of the defendant's version of the substantive facts there. He goes on to talk about some details that might differ between how I might view it or the police might view the case and how he views it. But that line tells the whole story. This was a pre-planned execution, something that I think had been denied by the other defendant, not denied by this defendant. I will also note that while he didn't 100%, he says in here he didn't know that the victim was going to die necessarily. He thought that was a good possibility, and I think that's fair to say. There have been so many shootings between these two groups of people that some have died and some haven't, and I don't see that as him being evasive in this pre-sentence investigation. He also states...
I'm going to interrupt you because I still don't totally understand what his beef was with the victim in this case. I mean, it sounds like he grew up with this family, they knew each other. Was there some beef with the younger brother, Christopher Somerset? I mean, I just don't understand why he was involved in this. I mean, then there's something about him being shot at, which is what the other co-defendant said. So I need to understand better what the reason was that he was involved in this, and do you have an explanation for that?
Sure. It's probably not going to satisfy you very much in that it's hard to peer into everyone's minds and exactly figure this out. As I said in the prior sentencing, there were two groups, two rival gangs involved in these disputes. Just because they're in two separate factions does not mean, especially in a small city like Madison, that those kids don't grow up together, even people in rival factions. And it's probably unlike what the court has seen maybe from other major cities or movies where there is a hard line between people of these different factions or gangs talking to each other, being close to each other. I think it is probably the case in Madison, especially given the fact that most of these young people know each other growing up, that some relationships are formed between folks who ultimately grow up into families that are on separate sides of these disputes. I think the most logical explanation for what happened here was that, again, this stemmed from a back-to-back or a back-and-forth shootings that stemmed from the O'Grady's pub shooting back in 2016. That back and forth between the two gangs was reinvigorated with the shooting of a guy named Ricardo Sims several years ago who was killed. He went by the name of Screwhead or Scroochie. That person...
And was that person, who shot him, who killed him? Do we know?
I can't talk about that right now.
Okay.
It's pending. All these are
it
pending
is.
investigations. As well as someone named Ducey, who was shot in the city of Chicago. They were on Mr. Galtney's side of this dispute. I know that because, and I know he was upset about that, and I know there was some retaliation planned about that because Mr. Galtney produced rap videos related to these disputes. And one of those rap videos was produced approximately 1 month prior to the shooting. I can read, and I'll read some of the lyrics. I'm not going to show the video in court, but I'm going to read some of the lyrics that directly references this and I think provides an answer for why this happened. I'm going to paraphrase to avoid saying racial slurs. And I'm going to read a very small portion. This is from Mr. Galtney in a video that was transcribed by the police for me. Nah, we ain't squashing no beef, but we promoting violence. They stayed inside the house when we was out sliding. These guys talk too much when we remain silent. My shorty and them died in the trenches. Now we got to score on them guys. We've been sliding for Scroochie. Now we got to get 2 of them. It's sad that happened to Ducey. Man, I miss him. My pain runs deeper than the ocean. My op's been out of town, but they ain't on shit. If bro's sliding, I'm sliding the shit back to back. The entire rap song is about taking revenge for the shooting of Scroochie Screwhead in Madison, a guy named Ricardo Sims, as well as Ducey, a guy in Chicago. And the whole song is about, literally it's titled Back to Back, is the defendant rapping about getting back at them, essentially evening the scorecard.
And so Mr. Galtney believed that the victim in this case was somehow associated with the shooting of those two men.
I don't know that you can even draw that conclusion as much as the conclusion could be drawn that he was on the other side of the dispute that was associated with the shooting. I will say that there's no theory right now that the victim in this case was the shooter in either of these incidents. It's simply a back and forth between two rival factions. I can only draw these assumptions, and again, I said it's not going to be super satisfying, and I suspect Mr. Cornier or the defendant might say they don't agree with my interpretation, which comes from the police. I'm not here drawing a ton of conclusions by myself, but the police have gang intelligence that looks at these things. They watch these videos. They talk to these people. There's obviously people who are that have provided more information over time, and that's probably as good as you're going to get. Is that there is this back and forth between these two rival gangs. Madison is a small city where those lines are not as sharply divided as you might see in a major city between gangs, and so it's not unheard of for someone, unfortunately, like Mom, who just came up here, to know a person who was involved in shooting at one of their family members. That's as good as you're probably going to get.
All right,
I
so
know
you can
that's
go
for
on
sure.
with your argument. Thank you.
I will note, in coming to the recommendation here, it is extremely rare. In fact, I have trouble even remembering the last time that we insisted on pleas, and that it being the district attorney's office insisted on a plea to first-degree intentional homicide for someone who didn't fire a weapon. Generally, those folks are provided plea agreements that lessen the charge because the mandatory sentence is life in prison. While the family feels extraordinarily betrayed by the defendant, and they should, looking at this from the perspective of myself as representing the executive branch of government, I place fault more highly on someone who is a shooter in a situation like this than someone who assists. Party to a crime liability in the state of Wisconsin is that alone. It's liability. It's whether you're liable for the incident. And there's no doubt the defendant was party to this crime. Not only did he aid in the hunting down of the victim before the execution, he then immediately assisted by fleeing with the shooter in a high-speed chase. In that high-speed chase, I'll note, the defendant hit a random person, at least one of them, and caused some damage to that person's car. They were obviously affected by that. The speeds were reached double and sometimes nearly triple the speed limit on Fish Hatchery Road, endangering many members of this community. There's no doubt that the defendant assisted in the commission of this crime and was certainly willing and able and did assist in the fleeing directly after. So when we look at the punishment the defendant's going to receive, simply the plea to the crime of first-degree intentional homicide is a considerable punishment that I would tell the court is probably far greater than the vast majority of people who commit this exact type of behavior. It's appropriate here, given the nature of this crime, given the fact that this was so calculated, pre-planned, given the betrayal, obviously, with the family. There's no doubt in my mind that a plea to first-degree intentional homicide was appropriate. As I said in the prior sentencing, and I'll note again, there was, I don't believe, ever a real risk. Certainly everyone has the right to go to trial. The defendant was certainly involved in this, and the proof was beyond any doubt. His DNA was found on the steering wheel of the vehicle after they fled. He was found near the car after it was ditched at Gerber Collision Center over by the Alina Energy Center. And while he could have went to trial, I do appreciate him pleading guilty and sparing the family and the government the expense and the emotional turmoil of going through that trial. He would have been convicted in short order, given just the immense amount of evidence against him. I give great weight to his introspection, the fact that he realizes what he did was wrong. And I give great weight to the fact that no matter what you do, he will be under the supervision of the Department of Corrections for the remainder of his life. Being eligible for extended supervision at 20 years, and I explained this to the family when I've met with them, does not mean someone gets out in 20 years. Obviously, as the court knows, there's an application process, and you have to essentially behave yourself for 20 years. your entire prison record, and that is your behavior and your sanctions and things you've done to improve yourself or not improve yourself, are all reviewed by that judge in 20 years to decide if you're someone they want to release or set a future date, or just to set no date. The defendant could, in theory, someday receive life without parole, 20 years or some later time from now, by a judge who determines he behaved poorly in prison. But I do believe, given the fact that this is someone who assisted in the crime and did not pull the trigger, that he should be treated differently. And that's why I do believe that this sanction is appropriate. That's why I've recommended it.
And you did see that the pre-sentence writer recommended life without parole. You saw
Correct.
that, okay. All right, Mr. Cornea, what do you think I should do?
Your Honor, this is a joint recommendation, so we're asking the same as the state. Life in prison, we know that that is not any other option for that, but that he be, the state would not oppose ES at 20 years. Now, there's lots of factors that go into that, as Attorney Brown noted. Mr. Galtney has to behave himself in prison, has to follow the rules, and has to do well, has to better himself. He's already talked about getting his GED while he's there, which I think would be a wonderful thing. Certainly plenty of classes, things to do, work, etc., to prepare himself for that, and I hope he does that. In regards to why we think this is appropriate, I will tell you, having done this for, 22 years now, going on 23, that it is extremely rare that the DA's office would insist and demand a first-degree plea in a case where the shooter was not the one, where another party that was not the shooter would get a first-degree charge. The nature of this offense, I think what drove a good portion of that was the location, the publicity that was involved because of the location. Certainly there was a lot of video evidence in that, and I think a lot of people were held up front that it occurred just outside the jail. I would note that I've had cases where individuals who have been in shootings and in execution-style shootings that have been given a first degree on several occasions. And I'm not faulting the state for that. I get why they're approaching it the way they did, and I believe Mr. Galtney gets why they're approaching it the way they are. I appreciate the statements by the family members on both the decedents as well as for Mr. Galtney. We've all lost people. I hope I shouldn't say that. I hope all of us haven't lost people, but certainly a number of us have lost people. And it is difficult. My family's had losses of someone that's 4 years old, 26 years old, 50 years old, for various reasons. And it is a tragedy to lose somebody, and you don't forget them, and you do think about them a lot. Even 20 or 30 years later, you still think about them. And so I understand their frustration. And I really appreciate, again, I appreciate all their statements, but his father's, the decedent's father's statement really struck me. maybe it's because of my upbringing in Utah and then in my religious beliefs that are involved, but forgiveness is such a way of healing. And I'm not criticizing the family for their anger that they feel right now, but I really hope that they can see within themselves to begin the process of forgiving. It doesn't have to happen immediately. They don't have to forget what happens, but it is a means of letting yourself grow and not be a victim of a crime for the rest of your life. And so I hope that they can reach that point, because I think it'll bring them some peace. I hope it will. And I know Mr. Galtney hopes that can bring them peace as well. Amon does have a lot to improve on. And this prison term, whatever it may be, is going to give him a chance to improve on it. He's a young man. And I believe Dwayne or DLC was, about 6 years older than my client. And certainly there's no denying the fact that there was some family engagement, that Amon was over at the house. But again, the state summed up what I've seen in my career in regards to Madison is that it's a very small community, and particularly among African Americans. They tend to be segregated into very small areas as well, and impoverished areas. And so there's a lot of connection. A lot of families know each other. A lot of people know each other in those small enclaves in Dane County where they live. And there's a lot of tension in those areas where people are struggling to survive, hustling to survive. And that leads to things that this community's seen way too much of, where people have done home invasions for drugs, where killings have occurred for drugs. And I'm not saying this is the case here. As the state noted that there was some family members or acquaintances killed in Chicago, and one up here, and it sounds like it's still under investigation. As I understand it, the parties involved in the shooting were both afraid and frustrated that they had been shot at by Dwayne on occasions. And I know the family's going to disagree with that, and I get it. I absolutely get it. And I don't know the whole story. I don't know where this shooting actually started. If it was, and I'm not here to put any blame on Dwayne, on DLC. It may have been others that started the shooting first. I don't know. It may be, as the state stated, that's what happened. I don't know. I do know that there was a conviction of possession of a firearm and some other serious charges in 15 CF 1473 on the part of DLC. Shooting outside of a vehicle or building. And I'm not here to tear him down from the pedestal the family sees, but I hope the judge. I hope you can see that there's a picture here of I want to say just, I can't find the right word. What pops in mind off the top of my head is silliness, but that is such an understatement, and I think the meaning statement, but that this kind of behavior occurs. It's just ridiculous that firearms have to be used as a means of proving one's manhood. And the more shooting there are, the more this occurs. I mean, over the June 19th holiday, we heard how many people were involved in shootings and killed in Chicago and shot around the country. It's an ongoing struggle and an ongoing tragedy across this country. My client participated in furthering that ongoing tragedy. And he is now going to pay the price for his decisions to engage in handling a firearm, both before this happened and being part of something when this happened. If it was up to me, I would say even the police shouldn't carry firearms. Europe does just fine with that. Of course, they have gun laws that have a lot of restrictions. And that's from someone who actually owns guns. It's a tragedy, and I guess I come to a loss of words in many ways because I feel for the family. I understand what the loss is like. Now, this was a much more abrupt loss and a much more violent loss than my family and people I know that have experienced. But I also know Ahmad, and I've known him for a while. I knew him before this occurred. And I knew various members of his family before this occurred. And this came as a huge surprise to me. So a lot of stuff they were involved in was, I wouldn't say petty, but it was nothing near the seriousness of this. So when I got that call a couple years ago, I was quite shocked. This joint recommendation that's been presented to the court takes into a lot of consideration. It certainly protects the public. It doesn't depreciate the seriousness of the offense. A lifetime sentence with the possibility of extended supervision after 20 years, that's a possibility. It's not a guarantee. So it's not taken away from the seriousness of it. And the character of Ahmad, he has a criminal history. It's difficult, but he's had a difficult life. And you hear that all the time, and you see that all the time. And it's frustrating and tragic that people have to go through life like this. That anger builds up, that family members have no contact with them, like Amon's father. That they live in a single mother household where the mother's working or trying to work and they have no supervision. But we have policies in this country that have led to these kind of situations. And it's a hard way to become up. It's a hard way to grow up. And you grow up fast and you grow up hard. Ahmad now has the ability and chance to take that edge, to take that street edge that he has and pull that away and highlight the edge, highlight who he is with his family, as it was described, a loving father, a companion, a brother, someone who's willing to help others. Because those are the two sides, and we want that side to shine and to come forth. We don't want this hardened individual who's been affected by his upbringings and has made his own choices based on that to continue. So we asked the court to go along with this joint recommendation. If you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Cornea. So we have people leaving. Did the sister want to come back in or not? No? She did. Okay. Okay. Mr. Galtney, this is your chance to say something if you would like.
Yes, I would like to say something. I would like to say that I apologize to the community, I apologize to the society, and I apologize to the family, the victim's family. I apologize to my family. I am very remorseful for my actions, and I know what I did was wrong. And this is one of the reasons why I pled guilty, because my decision that I made was the wrong choice. And I know that the victim's family probably will never forgive me, but I hope that God forgive me. And with this time that I have to do in prison, I am going to work on myself and better myself and become a better father. And I would just educate myself and just get my life together mentally and do it physically by doing what I have to do to make myself a better person. And I don't want people to think of me as a monster. I don't want people to think that if I do get the chance to come home that I will be the same person. And I know what I did was wrong, and I just want the community and everybody to know that I apologize.
Okay, thank you. Well, I guess the real question is, what did you think of yourself that you would be involved in something like this and put so many people at risk, losing your ability to father your child? I mean, there's all sorts of things that you should have considered before you were involved in this, because you were involved in the taking of the life of another human being. While you weren't the shooter, you were the driver, you were waiting for him. We saw video at the last hearing, and I know your lawyer has seen it, and I'm sure you have, of the car circling around. So you were waiting for the victim to be released from jail. You knew what was going to happen. You knew that Mr. Cummins had the gun. You drove away at high speed. You put people at risk in the community when you drove away. And you knew this person. I mean, this wasn't, Mr. Cummins didn't know him. You knew him. You grew up with him. So in my mind, you're just as responsible as the person who pulled the trigger. So I think that the crime that you pled to is appropriate, first-degree intentional homicide. So the only question now is whether or not you should have any opportunity of parole. The person who prepared the report says she doesn't think you should. And I understand that the lawyers both agree 20 years should be your eligibility date, and I'm the one who has to make the decision. So I'm going to consider the factors that the Wisconsin Supreme Court says I have to look at. And number one is the nature of the crime. This is as serious as it gets. It was a targeted shooting. You knew the victim was leaving the Dane County Jail. You were waiting for him. This occurred in downtown Madison, like right in front of the police station, right by the jail, while people were leaving work in broad daylight. And it was done in front of the victim's mother. And you knew her. She had you in her home, and you were participated in a crime where he was murdered right in front of her. And then fleeing in the car at high speeds. Thankfully, nobody was injured. But that kind of conduct, that crime is as serious as it gets in this community. I don't understand all of the motive here and the beefs, but what I would say to the people in this courtroom, this has to stop. How many fathers are we going to lose? How many 11-year-old girls are going to be in the crossfire? How many people are we going to lose to gun violence because I have a beef with him, or he's got a beef with her, or she said something on Facebook, or, I mean, you really want to wind up dead or incarcerated? Is that what you see your life? It's got to stop. I mean, as a judge, I've been doing this for 14 years. How many people do I see dying or wounded or put away, locked in a cage for their whole life? And for what? For what? So, you know, I just hope that everybody can look at this and have the forgiveness. I thought that Dwayne's father, you know, was just so powerful in recognizing, as somebody who had been incarcerated, that people can change, people can live out in this world. And I just hope that that happens for the people in this room. In terms of protection of the public, as I indicated, we're seeing too much of this gun violence. People are getting tired of it. The community doesn't feel safe. I should be able, and you should be able, to drive your kid to basketball practice and not worry that people are out there shooting guns. I should be able to leave work. You should be able to leave work and not worry that somebody is out there with a gun about to shoot somebody. So what you did was just so serious, especially it being in broad daylight with people in the community who were innocent, all the law enforcement who had to tend to Dwayne while he was dying. I mean, the trauma of that. I mean, I think you have to recognize the consequences, not just to you, not just to Dwayne's family, but to that little boy. That little boy, you're never going to be a father to that little boy. You're not going to see him play basketball or rugby or football. You're not going to get to see any of that. You've lost that because of your actions. And for what? For what? So protection of the public is a big one, obviously. And so your character, and so Mr. Gauntly, unlike your co-defendant, you're not 20 years old. I mean, you're a man. You're in your mid-20s. You're a father. And you have a long criminal history. Your criminal history started when you were 11 years old in the juvenile system, and you've been in the system pretty much nonstop. I mean, there hasn't really been a break in your life where you have not been part of the criminal justice system. Now, I get that things have been tough for you, that you grew up in difficult circumstances. You never really got to stay in one place. You moved around a lot, attended different schools. Sounds like you were a talented athlete. I mean, you were on sports teams. But you didn't have a father figure. You just had your mom, who I'm sure was doing the best that she could. And I do think that you have treatment needs as well. Mental health issues, you're taking medications for that. You started using drugs when you were just 13, so when you were young, and that affects brain development. That brings you into a culture where drugs are part of your teenage years. School is less important. And I do look at the fact that you took responsibility. You did plead guilty. You spared the state and the family the stress and the expense of a trial. But again, you're just as responsible as Mr. Cummins. I mean, they're trying to make the distinction that you were the driver and he was the shooter, but you knew him, you set it up, you were part of it. It didn't matter who pulled the trigger. You're both equally responsible. And to the victim's family, I know you feel more betrayed by Mr. Galtney. You knew him, he set it up. So you're thinking he's the one who should get life, and the state's saying, no, the other guy should get life. And, but for me, they're basically, it's hard for me to be able to distinguish them. They did the same thing. They both participated. And it's hard for me to say that one deserves life without parole and the other should have the eligibility of parole. You chose a lifestyle, you chose your associates, you made decisions that will make you an old man before you ever have the possibility of seeing the light of day. But while I do think you need to give up most of your life, I'm not persuaded that you should get life in prison without the possibility for parole. So just as I did with your co-defendant, I am going to find that you will be eligible to ask the court for release at the age of 65. I'm going to give you the correct birth date. I actually mixed it up, but your birth date is August 28th. Given your age, you will be eligible for extended supervision on August 28th, 2061. I need to let you know that you may petition the court for release to extended supervision no earlier than 90 days prior to your eligibility date determined by the court. Your behavior while serving your sentence could affect your eligibility date. Wisconsin law requires the warden of the prison to keep track of any violations of prison regulations, and the Wisconsin Department of Corrections may delay your eligibility date for a certain amount of days per violation, 10 days for your first violation, 20 days for your second, and 40 days for your third and any subsequent offense. Your eligibility date could also be delayed if your violations of prison regulations result in your placement in adjustment, program, or controlled segregation status. Your eligibility date could be delayed by 50% of the total number of days you spend on segregation status. When you file your petition for release for extended supervision, you shall serve a copy of that petition to the district attorney's office who is responsible for prosecuting your case, and the district attorney will have 45 days to respond. The court will then review your petition and any response submitted by the district attorney's office and determine whether or not a hearing needs to be held. The court may grant or deny the petition without a hearing. Before making a decision on your petition, the court shall allow victims to make and submit statements concerning your release. A court may not grant your petition for release to extended supervision unless you have shown by clear and convincing evidence that you're not a danger to the public. If the court does grant your petition, the court may impose conditions on your extended supervision. If the court does not grant your petition, the court will specify the date which you may file a subsequent petition. You may appeal an order denying your petition, and the appellate court may reverse an order denying your petition only if it determines that the court erroneously exercised its discretion in denying your petition. This information I've read to you is a summary of the statutes. I was required to read it to you in open court by the law. If you have any questions, you should talk to your attorney about it. And so, Mr. Galtney, what this says basically is that your conduct in prison will affect your ability to get out. You say you're going to take the opportunity to take advantage and better yourself. I hope you do that. I'm sorry that you're not going to be there for Aaliyah and the children, but that was a choice you made. You are now you are a convicted felon, so you may not vote in any election until your civil rights are restored. You may never own or possess a firearm. You do have 20 days to appeal what we've done here today. Did I miss anything? Mr. Brown?
30 days for restitution, please.
30 days for a restitution order. Did I miss anything, Mr. Cornea?
No, credit
All
was all,
right.
was all applied to his,
Well, and I don't think that he has
Revocation.
credit because I set an actual date for his
that's true.
eligibility.
That's true.
All right, then we are adjourned. Thank you very much.